Hello, this is Brad Dacus, President and founder of the Pacific Justice Institute. And on today's Zoom call, we're going to be talking about some case updates dealing with vaccine mandates, mask mandates, and some of these issues that are such a threat to our civil liberties today. So we're going to talk some cases. We're going to talk about also some of the latest updates, what's going on. What are the challenges with regard to students in colleges, universities, in the military? What about the churches and some of the new shutdowns that they're having to deal with or new requirements that they're having to deal with? We're also going to talk about from a customer perspective as well as a business perspective and give you an update on some of our cases that we have filed and are in the process of preparing to file. I think you'll find that very encouraging as well. To open us up, let's just go ahead and open up in prayer. And give this time to the Lord. Father, I thank you for the freedoms and liberties you've given us. Father, I pray for your blessing on this time. Guide us, Lord, direct us. You've not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and discipline, a sound mind. And so many in our nation right now are driven by fear, foolishness. God, just give us that direction and bless this time now for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so first, I want to just give you a quick update on dealing with some of the challenges we're seeing with regards to the public schools. We know that, and the private schools, the public schools, many of them are saying everyone has to wear a mask. And we also have private schools being threatened to have the same mandate that they have to wear a mask in states like California, potentially. So we're watching this very closely, and we're going to talk to Emily about this a little later. But this is facilitating the need for an educational alternative. A lot of families have been homeschooling on their own. Well, it's booming, but many families don't think they can homeschool on their own. So I just want to throw this out right up front and encourage you to seriously consider working with your church to start a church homeschool co-op, or if you're Jewish, to start a synagogue homeschool co-op to provide an alternative for children who are in public schools. You may not like the curriculum, may not like the radical leftist indoctrination. You may not like the inferior academics that often exist, particularly in urban public schools. But there's an alternative now that is springing up, and that's church homeschool co-ops. And if you want more information about this, just go to our website, pji.org. pji.org, and simply click the area that deals with parental rights, and you'll find the information and resources about how you can go about starting a church homeschool co-op. Want to plant that right up front because that needs to be on our minds, particularly for those of you who are dealing with children in public schools, K through 12 in particular. All right, so we have an office, as many of you know, in Washington State, along with many other places across the country, from Miami to Seattle, from New York City to Orange County, California, and places in between. But I want to focus on Washington State right now. They've given us some problems, to say the least, with regard to the shutdowns. Well, they're also having growing challenges with regard to mandatory vaccines or masks and the like. And I just want to say right up front, there's different perspectives on whether or not people should be vaccinated, whether or not they want to wear a mask. I get that. This is about freedom and liberty, and the extent to which we're going to maintain those freedoms and liberties to be able to make those choices and decisions ourselves with regard to our own future and our own destiny. That's the part of the American spirit, and we see that definitely being threatened along with our constitutional liberty. So to talk about what's going on in Washington State, we have with us now the attorney who heads up that office, Tracy Tribbett. Tracy, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Now, Tracy, what's going on first off in that employee case? We filed a lawsuit, I understand, on behalf of an employee that was fired because they would not take the mandatory vaccine from their employer. Tell me more, please.
In Washington state, you cannot discriminate or be discriminated against as an employee or employer if someone does not want to take the vaccine. What you have to offer is a reasonable accommodation for that. And in our case, our plaintiff was not offered a reasonable accommodation. In fact, she was surreptitiously fired from her employer. And so we filed suit on her behalf, and we are simply waiting to hear back from the defendant in that case. And we're here to let you know if you have experienced similar things. PJI is here to represent you and to help you through very hard times, not only in the midst of COVID, but in the midst of the emotional trauma that comes from being fired and all that comes with that.
Now, this employee, correct me if I'm wrong, but this employee talked to her employer, who said, hey, everyone has to be vaccinated, and she let the employer know, hey, I have religious convictions, against the vaccine. This employer is required by law to try to make some kind of good faith effort to accommodate her, but he didn't do that. He just fired her.
That's correct. There was no discussion. It was simply, I can do this from the employer's standpoint, that they could do what they wanted and did not have to give a reasonable accommodation for the sincerely held religious beliefs of our plaintiff and their employee, and simply fired her.
Okay, now what would be like a reasonable accommodation? Like wearing a mask could possibly be a reasonable accommodation, right?
And a lot of people aren't happy with that, but again, what a reasonable accommodation is something that we can argue later on. But if you're fired without even having been given the opportunity to have been told, well, you'll have to wear a mask, or you're going to have to do this, or to negotiate that process, if you're simply fired from the outset, that is discrimination and is against the law. Some people may not be happy with what reasonable accommodation they're offered, but we can help to negotiate that in the long term. But you need to know that if you are fired for such a thing without any offer or any accommodation, you have a case that we will represent you in.
Yeah, and I want people to know I'm not a mask fan, okay? Because I've done my own reading. I've talked to doctors who I respect tremendously, and they've enlightened me as to some of the pragmatic problems inherent with requiring someone to wear a mask, particularly for a prolonged period of time. But if employees say they lay claim to a religious exemption, and we get to accommodation, let's say the employer is, more reasonable and says, okay, I want you to wear a mask. The employee can still come back, and if they have a health issue, perhaps they have COPD, they have issues where maximizing oxygen intake is a real factor for them, or they have, say, hypertension or anxiety attacks wearing a mask, and they have a doctor to back them up or a psychiatrist to back them up, then that's a whole separate issue, separate from the religious exemption, right? So
Correct.
that's one avenue they have is religious exemption. Another avenue they have possibly that could come into place with regard to the accommodation issue is the health exemption.
Yeah, and that's really a strong case there. I think that we need to look at what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Your strength is in a vaccine exemption because even in Washington, our governor has come out and said that he will allow for religious exemptions. And the mask exemption from a doctor's hand is what I would call less contentious. And so you can make both of those arguments in separate legal lanes, if you will, but you've got them both. PJI can handle the religious exemption, and then you can obtain a doctor or a lawyer on the other side for your health exemption. And those are two very strong arguments that could and may hold up in court. And that way you are not jeopardizing one or the other. I think that right now the strongest case for health is with the mask, and the strongest case for the vaccine is with a religious exemption if you have one.
Okay. What about other things that are taking place there in Washington State? I understand they are coming down with new mandates. What are those new mandates?
Yes, the governor announced on Monday that all healthcare workers and all state employees would be required by October to have the vaccine. And so we've been getting flooded with calls and concerns from people who do not want to have the vaccine and are concerned about this. The governor, however, also came out, and a lot of people, may not have heard this, or they just immediately panicked, but he said that people with sincerely held religious beliefs can obtain a religious exemption from the vaccine. So if you are someone in Washington who does not want to have the vaccine and is looking to your employer for an exemption, if they have not given you that opportunity, or they are threatening you somehow, we've had some calls from some employees who've been threatened with being moved within their departments or moved off of their jobs into another job. That's a form of discrimination. PJI is here to help you obtain your exemption from the vaccine. And the governor openly stated that those would still be upheld for healthcare workers, for anyone in the state. Where people can kind of get concerned long range is you don't necessarily have a constitutional right to your particular job. What you have a constitutional right to is to not be discriminated against on the basis of your religion within your job. So you're going to want to keep that in mind as we're going through this. We can't do all things, but what we can do is ensure that you are not discriminated against within your job on the basis of your creed, your sincerely held beliefs against being vaccinated. And so we are here to assist with that, and we are assisting.
Okay. Now, it's important for people who are laying claim to religious exemption, as I understand it, not just have a form where they just check a box and says religious exemption. That doesn't prove their sincerity. The key question is to show that they're sincere. So my understanding is, Tracy, that they should put in writing from their heart why their faith compels them to have a religious exemption. I encourage them quoting at least a couple scriptures and apply it. Someone like for myself, what I would say is, my body is God's temple. My body is a dwelling of the Holy Spirit, and God wants me to not mistreat my body. I'm convicted after prayer, and I believe that from the guidance of the Holy Spirit that God does not want me to have this vaccine. I'd quote some verses about my body being God's temple, about following the direction of the Lord, not following the ways of man necessarily. And I'd put that in there, and I'd write it out, at least a half page or a page. Just the more you pour yourself into it, the more you explain it, the more you meet that hurdle of sincerity. It has to be sincerely held religious beliefs. Doesn't matter if they agree with you theologically, or if they think you're right theologically. Doesn't matter. It's just you need to pour some of yourself in to show that sincerity, and displaying the spiritual nature of it. Like I felt called by the Holy Spirit. That's good. That's not bad. That's good, because it shows you're really being open and sincere. Yeah. So that's sort of what you would agree, right, Tracy?
Yeah. Yes. I have always taken the position that you do not need, a 501c3 or your pastor or someone in authority over you to give you that exemption or to go to them. What you need is God's word, and you've gotten God's word. It is inerrant, and it has stood the test of time. And if you go to God's word, it is replete with instances and quotes from scripture in almost every book of the Bible that would back up the opposition to being vaccinated, if that's what God has sincerely put on your heart. You do need to be able to articulate it. You need to go to God's word, prayerfully consider what he would have you put down, and we're always here to help you articulate that if you're not someone who maybe can put that into writing as easily. But you don't need to have your church sign off on it. And in fact, I think that weakens the overall argument, because it allows for someone else to come between you and your walk with God. And even if you were not convicted last year of it and you are now, that is a walk, and that is how we walk with God. The Holy Spirit is constantly convicting us, changing us, and helping us to continue to obey where God is leading us. And so this does not have to be something that you have always been convicted of since you became a Christian, or even when you were younger. It's something that God has convicted you of now. And who knows if you were not born for just such a time as this. We here at PJI are here to help you stand up for this in your particular, in your walk and in your life and in your community where God has placed you.
I appreciate that very much, Tracy. Received an email from someone, they said the last Zoom that we didn't, we just said roll over and just, give in. That is not our messaging. So if anyone got that messaging from our last Zoom call, I want to apologize right now. That's not what we're doing. We're going to talk a little even later about some of our other litigation in cases that we're doing, but we're helping scores of people right now stand up for their rights, stand up against challenges to their freedoms and liberties. And once again, people have different convictions about vaccines generally, about this specific vaccine. We have a free society. We're here to empower you and enable you to do what you feel is right and what's best for you, and have that freedom and liberty. That's what this is about. We could be here all day talking about the facts and issues and questions, and with regards to the vaccines and the statistics. I have so many numbers in my head, but I'm not gonna bore you with that at this time. We're talking about your freedoms and liberties. So thank you very much, Tracy. I appreciate that. I'd like to bring on now our star from the state of Nevada, Attorney Emily Mimnaugh. Emily, welcome to this Zoom conversation. I'm Emily. I was wondering if you could give us the latest CDC updates and what is the current federal and state requirements that you're aware of, and or guidelines. If you can sort of make a distinction between those, that'd be great too.
I can make a distinction. I think that's a really great way, Brad, to start off discussing the CDC, because we see a lot of inaccurate reporting sometimes. I don't think intentional, where you see, new rules from the CDC, and it's guidance. And that's important, because what happens is in almost every instance, the CDC updates and revises its guidance. And we've seen that a lot, and I won't make fun of them because they're doing their job, and it's our job to read it and interpret it and apply it as best we can in a way that we think is reasonable. And we have seen, of course, most recently the changes in the masking updates and the vaccination recommendations, but these are not overwhelmingly ever rules or federal law. I think someone was asking me about what's the new law from the CDC, and I said, well, I'm not aware of any, but we did see with the moratorium and the evictions, that was really an exceptional case, right? And of course, that was all over the headlines, that they actually did issue an order. Okay, so that was the exception, not to confuse people, but not the rule. And so generally, when we're talking about the CDC, we are talking about guidance. And it's very important to remember that, and then look at your state, your county, and sometimes your city even, to see what actual orders are being issued. Do they apply to you? And then how do they apply? Because we'll see a lot of, I won't say sloppy, but sometimes slippage in the language about what is an order, what is guidance. So if you're not sure, always reach out to us and we can help you read and interpret it and see if it applies to you, and if so, how.
Okay. So that's as far as the actual new guidelines, updates, anything specific that you want to point out?
Well, we have seen, I think it's fair to say, a return of a lot of the mask mandates, regardless of vaccination status, in various states. So where you're seeing places like, I'll take my state, Nevada, as an example, where what our governor has done is issued an executive order that says if you're on one of these high risk, right, or substantial COVID transmission counties, that you are going to be recommended by the CDC. And in Nevada, you are then going to be required to wear a mask when you're indoors, regardless of your vaccination status. So on the one hand, you're not going to have people asking for your papers when you enter the Walgreens. On the other hand, that's because you have to be wearing a mask no matter what under our state guidelines. But again, that's our state order incorporating the CDC guidelines.
Okay. As far as like other states are concerned, I know like Los Angeles County is requiring a mask whether you're vaccinated or not. In any indoor place at all. I think some counties in the San Francisco Bay Area are following suit. Is this the sort of the trend that you're seeing right now across the country, particularly in blue states?
I was going to say, it depends on the color of the state, Brad. Yes, that is the trend, to be blunt. It's no good to give you information if it's not, direct and honest. So we are seeing an increase in these mask mandates, usually at a county level. As you said, we've got 8, Bay Area, or 9, I think now. You've got them in the Bay Area, you've got them in LA County, Yolo, Sacramento, and all of these orders from the counties are a little bit different. And I can tell you, we've read, well, I won't say all of them, but we've read most of them. So if you have a question about your specific county and how the rules may vary, go ahead and reach out to us. But we are seeing that trend. On the other hand, we have 9 states in America that have actually outlawed vaccine mandates. And we have other states that have outlawed or banned vaccine passports. So those are two slightly different pieces, but we are seeing states going in a complete opposite direction, moving towards individual freedom, or at least local based freedom and choice on those questions.
Okay, what are those states that are moving the other direction? Florida's one who banned they banned masks. Is that right? Mandatory masks.
Florida's an interesting case because they just had that lawsuit. So there's currently an injunction on that ban. The ban has been banned, so that's going to go up the legal chain. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Most recently, interestingly, Ohio, big state, swing state, so you never know what color it's going to be on any given day. And they actually have an order that says that you can't mandate the vaccine as long as it's EUA, emergency use authorization only. So that's kind of an interesting take, right? So as long as it's not FDA approved, if it's authorized emergency use only, they're not going to allow schools to require it for. So, we're getting a lot of these cases. We have over 500 universities and colleges right now in America that are saying you have to get the vaccine in order to attend the university or the college. So that's another trend we're seeing. And so we are seeing states push back on that, specifically and particularly while it's still EUA only.
Right. So we're seeing more universities requiring vaccinations and masks, I guess.
We are. And of course, when I say they're requiring it, most of the time they are accommodating people who have sincerely held religious objections, and we are representing. I can tell you, I just spoke with one of our affiliate attorneys, and it has a list of over 300 cases. Just that one person handling all of those things. And so we are helping and representing quite a few people. And that actually, Brad, I know you're really excited about our new webpage design, which is, I think, happening right now.
Yes, let's go ahead and mention that. It's actually it's really good. On our website, if you go to pji.org, you could it may be like overwhelmed right now, but you could take a look on the rotating banner. And the rotating banner, you'll see, I think it's banner number 2. You'll see a place you can click and have a full access to all the resources. Also, it's under religious freedom resources. You can click it there. But also on the chat, we're going to send you on the chat the direct landing page. Is it on there now? Okay, great. So you guys can look at that and be able to click that as well now or later. And we've got great resources to observe at that time. So take a look. Be sure to use that. You click a button for employee, you click a button for student, and it just lays it all out there really nicely. How to deal with vaccine mandators who come to your door under President Biden's Strike Force program, how to deal with them. Just some real updated research that's, I think, going to be very helpful. So college universities, some of them they're requiring forced vaccinations or negative test results, requiring students to have a test. If a student is being told, well, you can be on campus, but you have to have a test result every week, are they told that they have to pay for it, or are usually the university's covering that cost, right?
It depends. So that is something you want to ask a university and have them commit to providing that for you. And one of the things I like to tell people, and we've had a lot of success with this, is look at the handbook, your policies. Usually you have a diversity and an inclusion statement from all of these universities. And they tell you how inclusive they are and how they want to promote tolerance and diversity. And wouldn't you know it, that includes Christians. And so that has actually been very helpful for us to say, you know what, we have this policy right here that says you're going to, work overtime and accommodate people of all different faiths and all different backgrounds. So that has actually been something we've been able to use very effectively for a lot of different cases.
Yeah, very effectively. So that's been very helpful. So college to university students, they should contact us. They can also use that resource. What about people in the military? We heard recently President Biden's appointment to the head of the military came out and said that he's going to require everyone in the military to be vaccinated, all our young men and women to be vaccinated, whether they like it or not. And then we've seen something else that's come out that's tweaked that a little bit. How's that been tweaked, and what do we need to be looking for?
Well, it's one of those very scary headlines, and I don't want to say it's not going to happen because it may. But we saw them immediately say, well, we're going to do that as soon as it gets actual FDA approval, or when the president actually, gives an actual waiver on consent. So firstly, it hasn't happened. We're watching to see the actual language of the orders. We can see what it actually says. And we have already been told from the military sources that they're going to have exemptions on a branch by branch, depending on the actual regulations for the division in which you're working. So we're going to be looking at those to see what actually happens. And then, of course, we got that opinion, and I'm going to put air quotes around that, but it's an opinion, from the DOJ, which basically went through whether or not they thought, in their opinion, whether or not employers could mandate this emergency use authorization only vaccine. And they, I'm not the most stretchy person, but somebody there must be very flexible, because I was very impressed, to be honest, with the gymnastics they went through to reach that conclusion. I obviously disagree with it. And it's not a court opinion. So what does it mean? It means there's a source out there that's encouraging employers to push forward with vaccine mandates, and the military. And it means that you can't probably expect the DOJ to intervene like we saw in the last couple of years when we saw these unconstitutional closures of churches. That's what it really means, in my opinion. And of course, you still have the Doe number 1 v. Rumsfeld case from 2003, which is a very similar situation, in which the federal courts granted an injunction against the mandate of an unauthorized, slightly different, but basically not FDA-approved vaccine in the anthrax context.
Yeah. Yeah. The Department of Justice and the prior administration was very pro-religious freedom, very strongly in favor of our constitutional rights under the First Amendment. This new Department of Justice under this administration is someone that we cannot count on. In fact, we can probably count that we're going to have to expect them to be on the other side when it comes to these issues, and that's unfortunate. But the bottom line, if there's people in the military, men and women, who are told that they have to have the vaccine, they should definitely contact us. You can do it at pji.org, or info@pji.org, and we'd be happy to make contact with you. But go to our website, take a look at that landing page. We've got real good information to help you. Also, vaccines Q&A. We want to equip you. But our bottom line is at PJI is that they have to accommodate you. If you have a religious objection, they need to accommodate you. They can't just say you have to be vaccinated or you're out of here. We will stand up and we'll defend you wholeheartedly if you're facing that. You're already having to face trials and challenges defending our nation and putting your lives on the line. We don't believe you should have to compromise in your convictions or your health or ability to potentially, have children or et cetera. So this is something very important to us, and we're willing to go to bat for you if you're in the military as well. What about businesses requiring vaccinations? How does that play out?
Well, to be blunt, the court cases that have thus far gone to court have not been largely successful. We saw that most dramatically with the Houston nurses, the Bridges case. Of course, they're going to fight that. And so I wouldn't take any of these rulings typically as final. So don't please get discouraged. Keep coming to us. We will help you and we will find a way forward. In most of these circumstances, we actually reach an amicable solution with the employer without having to actually file any type of action. That said, I just spent last week several hours in mediation with a federal agency representing somebody who came to us out of California. So it can also be a long process, long or short. So can your employer say you must be vaccinated? Usually they can, but you can ask for your religious accommodation, and you are entitled to that under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. If you're in California, under FEHA. If you're in Nevada, that's the NRS, Section 233. And so every state basically has these types of laws to protect you from religious discrimination in an employment context. So you'll have to find what a reasonable accommodation for you is, and it is going to be employment specific. So when I talk about all these different cases, you have to look at the context and find how it is you're going to work with the employer to do your job and, of course, not violate your conscience.
I know we already successfully represented early out from our New York office. We about a half dozen nurses who are being told that they had to be vaccinated, and we went to bat for them, and we worked it out so that instead they had to wear masks instead of being vaccinated. Also, that the type of employment can be a factor as well. If you've got, say someone with a high exposure to people who are sick versus someone who doesn't, marginal exposure to people who are not inherently sick and vulnerable. I know those are factors that could come into play on defining what's reasonable versus what's not reasonable. And of course, your individual circumstances is also just as important, and your particular convictions as well as your particular medical concerns. What about customers? What about it from a consumer perspective? Emily, what are they to do? We heard about in Australia, the QR code requirement that's being implemented in order to buy or sell goods. You have to have your little cell phone match the QR code and on the store of the business. The government monitors you. It'll say whether or not you're vaccinated. If you're not, reject. You can't do business. You can't buy your groceries there. I know we're not there yet, but what are we looking at in terms of the trend line for customers being pressured and not accommodated who are not vaccinated?
Overwhelmingly, we are not Australia. We are not yet living in a show your papers, please country. That said, we have seen it, of course, New York City most famously, I think. In the headlines, they have the Excelsior Pass saying you must show that you are vaccinated, fully vaccinated, in order to be indoors at restaurants or at cinemas. So we do see, I would think it's fair to say more liberal places tending to encourage these, what I think are violations of your freedom of movement. But overwhelmingly, we're not seeing that yet. We have seen the return of the mask mandates, but those are coming from the government, not typically from your actual specific private business owners, small and large. So we're not seeing that yet. I hope if we do, we're going to have a think about how we're going to handle that legally. But from the actual private entities, no. And then, of course, and we've talked about this before, when it comes to the mask mandates, you usually, if you do have a specific medical reason why you can't wear a mask, your doctor has told you that, then I don't think I've seen a single mask mandate that says you have to wear it regardless of your medical condition, because that obviously would be contrary to the supposed intent.
Yeah, and I was just going to say there are valid medical conditions. I know the story of a girl, she was competing and she just collapsed because she was forced to wear a mask, outdoor competition, and she collapses. It's insane, absolutely insane. And that's why there's so many doctors who are just furious over this political bombardment and taking over of common sense in the medical profession dealing with these issues. Customers, so far we're not there yet, but we do have places like in California where it looks like the trend line that we see, there's growing efforts for the vaccine passport as a condition to be able to go to certain places, do certain things. What about churches? I understand like in LA County, they're told that if you're indoors, whether you're vaccinated or not, you have to wear a mask in any indoor place. That would include churches. What do we tell churches in those sorts of situations?
Well, again, you want to make sure you are in compliance with the law. And if you're looking to file a lawsuit, then as you know, Brad, of course, we have done that and we've taken it to Supreme Court and we've won. So it depends on your circumstances. But if you are looking just to follow the law and make sure everyone in your congregation is doing the same, you want to do that. And again, it's important to remember from a liability standpoint, churches are often also employers. So you do have your employment law rules that you need to be following just for your employees, not for everyone, who's attending your church. So post the signs, make sure people are compliant. And of course, make sure people know that everyone who has a medical condition, who can't wear a mask, no expectation, of course, that would not be safe. So we're seeing that. And of course, here in Nevada, we have the same thing that you're seeing in California, where we are having a return to some of the indoor mask mandates, even for churches. And I should say again, of course, if we find that yet again, governments, state, counties are not applying these rules even-handedly, which is say, we shut churches, but we don't shut Costco. We require masks in churches, but not in Costco. You better believe we'll file a lawsuit yesterday.
Quick, I hate to say, we have some people wanting to be admitted. Can we jump on those? Okay, great. Thank you. I want to make sure we get everyone in. When admitted pops up, I want to make sure we click those. We only have a room for 1,000, and so when we get an opening, we want to quickly be a time limit. Like right now, there's another one right there. So if we can move on that, you guys, that'd be great. Thanks. I appreciate that. Well, this has been really helpful regarding this. What about required tests being coercive? I've talked to some nurses, Emily, where they're being told that they have to have the the PCR is what I believe it's called. It's where it goes up your nose. This long tube thing goes up your nose, then goes back down. It really hurts. A lot of nurses have issues with it. It has one of the chemicals it allegedly has is ethylene oxide, which is a carcinogen, and if it's used repeatedly, twice a week, and what especially if the employee has to pay for it, is there like an argument that employers are being coercive and not really being reasonable in their accommodation if they make the employees pay for it, or they use a test that arguably has carcinogens?
We are seeing that in California, and if for anybody who thinks I'm beating up on California, born and raised, so love California, but they are very proudly flying the flag right now for being first in the nation on these. And of course, this week we saw another mandate about if you're not vaccinated, you must be tested at least once a week for all teachers, staff, faculty at any school in California, public or private. That's what California is saying. And to the point about testing, they were very specific and said if to meet this testing mandate from the state, they're saying you have to get that PCR test, also called a molecular test, or you have to have an antigen test. So we are seeing that, and we have spoken with a lot of nurses, and we don't comment on exactly how and when things might take a very specific legal litigation edge, but that is obviously something that's happening in the background. I'll leave it at that. And I will also say to the testing and the coercion point, yes, of course it's coercive, in my opinion. And there's another lawsuit we're seeing on the East Coast looking at that as well in the context of required vaccination for faculty at Scalia Law School. So I think Mr. Scalia, rest his soul, will be very happy to see that someone at his law school is fighting that as well.
Okay, so people need to understand that we are giving counsel, we have resources, but we're also litigating. We talked about the Washington State case. You have a federal employee case that you're handling. And we also have, right now, I understand, representing hundreds of students and employers or employees who are trying to stand up to this and are working very aggressively. I'd like to be able to give you the insight of what we're doing and our strategy. All I can say is if you're getting our Legal Insider, if you're getting our emails, you're getting our updates, which you should be if you registered for this, then you'll find out what we're doing as we lay out our litigation and file our lawsuits. It's all I can say is it's huge. The number we're assisting, the volume, and the legal punch that we're punching back with, I think is very formidable. Fortunately, we've had a lot of success. Yes, Emily.
I was to say one group, actually, I should have mentioned to you earlier, Brad, but of course you know this, but people listening may not, is an interesting group that has also been affected by these mandates in the healthcare sector. Of course, there's a lot of pro-life centers, and I can't, name specific names, but we have been working with them. And so if you are working with them either in California or elsewhere in the nation, and you need help with this, I mean, we know and we've discussed the abortion links. And so a lot of people have very strong and obvious objections to the vaccine if you're a pro-life, anti-abortion center. So reach out to us about that as well, because we're already working with a number of clinics on that front.
Yeah. So we're involved in a number of different fronts here, trying to equip everyone, trying to make sure everyone has legal defense without charge. And I just want to say just right up front, folks, if you're supporting our work, I just want you to know it's very much appreciated. One thing that makes us unique as a legal ministry is we don't just cherry pick a few cases. We make sure we're unique. We make sure everyone gets help, that no one's left on the side of the road. And right now it's quite a taxing endeavor, but God's given us the grace to do it. And I want to thank each and every one of you out there who are part of our team and support us on a one-time or a monthly basis. Monthly supporters are much more appreciated because that gives us much more to count on in terms of planning ahead for litigation and making future plans for bringing lawsuits and the like. So just want to thank you right up front for those of you who are part of that, part of the PJI team to make this all happen. That's moms and dads, grandmas and grandpas. That's our source, and I really appreciate that, along with many churches. Emily, what about the PJI resource on vaccinations? I know Ron Hackberg Heckenberg wasn't able to join us. He's under the weather right now, but he's been working really hard on that. What are some of the key changes that we've seen that you want to highlight regarding that resource that so many people have already downloaded?
Right. The latest update does a really nice job of looking at the EUA status and walking through what that means and going through the DOJ opinion, of course, because I disagree. I know Ron disagrees with some of the conclusions that were drawn out of that. So that it's a legal, it's a legal analysis. So it's good to have that in writing and be able to go through it. And of course, if you have questions, so you're going to see that talking about changes in some of the state laws like Ohio that we talked about. And some of the case updates, we're tracking when we're not directly involved in the case. We're still watching them, of course, and tracking the progress there. So we're seeing that. We added in some more information about HIPAA because people are still coming to us with questions about how HIPAA does or does not apply. And then explaining some of the differences between your federal rights, your federal protections under employment law, under Title VII, Title IV if you're a federal employment employee sometimes. And then how that aligns with those state protections you have as well, like at the FEHA in California, for example. So helping people see how this can apply to them and understand it on a more technical basis. And also, I should say, the Mayo Clinic study that just came out, these studies as well, we don't, directly opine on medical studies, but of course, we want everyone to have the latest and greatest information.
Okay, very good. Let's go and open it up for Q&A if we can. And what I encourage you to do is when you go to the chat room, if you have your register your Q&A, make sure you have your name and where you're from. So Bob from Boise, and then we'll call on you, and then you can give us your question. And when I ask you to give your question, click the unmute button. Please do that immediately when I ask your name, so you can come right on. And we can get to as many of these as we can possibly. I know we have a lot of questions. I see the heads nodding up and down. Okay. By the way, we just keep hitting that 1,000 barrier level. We didn't realize we're going to have such more than 100% of those who registered initially. We just had a lot of late add-ons. So we've been trying to watch the waiting room and allow people to come on as these spots open up. And I appreciate you guys and the staff that are working hard to do that as well. Monica from Riverside, you're the first question. Ready?
All right, I'm here, Brad. I love everything that you guys do. Big up PJI. I tell everybody every time I come across somebody. My question is, my employer allowed for the medical or religious declination. However, they're saying that we're going to be subjected to weekly testing and have to go through some kind of COVID vaccine training. And so is that a reasonable accommodation if you're going to have to go through training? Because I'm not going to change my mind and say, okay, I'm going to get the vaccine. And how long would I have to go through that testing where it's becoming unreasonable?
Yeah. Emily, what do you say about that?
Well, we've talked a little bit about the testing requirements, and depending on how onerous they are and who is and is not paying for it, please email us directly and we can look at that specifically. And on this training piece, I'll say two things. One, we do know that California updated its Cal OSHA rules for employers, and it states that you have to include a written COVID plan and training that includes information about how to access vaccination. So we've seen that imposed by the state. However, if you're being singled out for this special training, which is to say, I would say education to try to make you change your mind, I don't see how that is at all in any way accommodating your religious beliefs, and it's not going to make you or your coworkers any safer. So I would be very curious to ask more questions about that specifically and your employer, because that to me does not smell legally right at all.
Okay, sounds good. The other thing I want to ask real quick, how do we file a class action lawsuit against Newsom? That's been in the chat. I think we should do it. So let's get that going.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Class actions, you have to have plaintiffs who all have a common fact pattern, a common issue of law, and a very similar, closely aligned fact pattern. And it has to be, of course, be a legitimate lawsuit. I can't really comment more on that as far as what we're doing or planning to do. But they're also very intensive. sometimes you can have the same legal punch and results with just a few plaintiffs with a decision that it's binding on the governor and binding in favor of every Californian, just as you can with a class action. Oftentimes with class actions, you want to be looking often at wide scale damages, like people who've been victimized by Roundup or something like that. And those kind of that's where a class action really plays out. But the injunctive power of a litigation can be binding for every single person under that government authority. So every single Californian can be protected with just one lawsuit seeking permanent injunction against a governor's action. I know where you're coming from, and I share your sentiment on that. And that's as far as I'm going to go for this Zoom call. But I do appreciate that very much, and that's a good question. Pauline and Menifee. Pauline, what's your question?
Hi, Brad. Well, I'm a substitute teacher, so the governor mandated that we have to have vaccines, or I think we might have the option of being tested. I haven't really heard, but who will be the authority that we go to with a religious exemption? Would it be our own district or?
Your own district. Once again, where do you work?
Well, I live in Menifee. I have two school districts that I work for as a
You're a substitute teacher, but you're a paid substitute teacher for two school districts.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, Emily, where should she go? Should she talk to the principal of each school that she's teaching? Where and what should she give that principal or that teacher?
Well, you should only be required to give a religious belief declination, what's called a declination form. So when they implement it, and I should note, there's a bit of an odd, well, I won't speculate as to why it happens to be not in effect until 1 month after the recall, but you can do the math for yourself. So the mandate on school teachers, it's not a joke. You must be in compliance. Your school must be in compliance according to this mandate by October 15. So, 1 month and a day, go figure. But what you need to do is have your religious reason. And if they just say, all you have to do is say, I have a religious belief that prevents me from getting the vaccine, end of story, that would be great. If it's not, and they want you to submit a letter, we can help you write that letter. If they start doing some type of almost inquisition cross-examination regarding the sincerity of your beliefs or when it is you adopted those beliefs, I would push back, and by which I mean come to us and we will help you push back. And so it will be different, but based upon how your school or how your school district does it. They also said in their in their most recent order that there are IT platforms that they want districts to use. I'm not suggesting districts should, but it may be that there's a platform which you just push the button. And again, we don't normally encourage people dealing directly with your employer to say, I have a religious exemption, that's it. But if that's how the order is written, that's all you need to do.
Okay. Real quick, Emily, if someone, I've talked to a number of doctors have come out and they made it very clear that people who've had actually had COVID, have a stronger immunity than those who have the vaccine. And I've heard that if someone who's had COVID has that natural immunity, has the vaccine, they're more likely to have serious side effects, potentially some very serious side effects. And even some contend that it would actually weaken their natural immunity, put them in a worse position than just relying on their natural immunity than getting the vaccine also. There's not a lot of accommodation, is there, for people who've in that situation? I don't see that out there much, where they're saying, you've had the COVID. Maybe as like 90 days, they'll give you some accommodation for 90 days not to be vaccinated. But that's about it, isn't it?
That's what we've seen from the state of California, that 90-day basically stay of requiring the vaccine mandate or the testing mandate. So in California, with this latest for both the teachers and for and more specific for the teachers, you don't actually have to start doing this weekly testing if you've had COVID within the last 90 days. That said, the state is very blunt and they said, we don't care if you had a test yesterday that says you have the antibodies. That doesn't matter. You still have to get tested. Do I think that's reasonable? Of course not. And I think that's a very strong case to challenge this order. Yes, I do. And so if you're out there, if you're in a rural area, if you've had COVID, if you know you have the antibodies and you don't think you should be subjected to weekly testing, I think you are in a very strong position to challenge it, but with PJI if you want. So reach out to us on that, because I do think that is a strong case. And we're seeing that right now litigated at the Scalia Law School.
Okay, great. Very good. Okay, what about, let's say, Mike in California? What's your question? Mike? This is Mike in California. Maybe, okay, we'll just keep going then. Whitney in Orange County. Whitney in Orange County, what's your question? Thanks for joining.
I'm a nurse with the UC hospitals, and I was wondering, is there like a class action lawsuit going on with that as far as requiring vaccines?
With the UC hospitals, Emily, what do you know about that?
Well, there's been a lawsuit filed by Orange County. I know that just this week, challenging the overall state of emergency. Specific to the UC nurses at the hospitals, I don't know about that specifically. I know we're working with a lot of nurses across California from different groups, from private hospitals to get the religious exemption. But the mandate doesn't take effect until next month. So I can't comment beyond that.
Yeah, I know I talked with a number of nurses at a demonstration, a rally at Chalk, Orange County, or Children's Hospital of Orange County, along with St. Joseph Hospital. Kaiser nurses were there. So we're working with a lot of nurses right now, and some doctors and physicians. So just be in touch with our office, and we'll be happy to work with you. We're very active on the medical front right now.
One more quick question. I'm finishing up my religious exemption. If I email that to you guys, how quickly would that be reviewed?
I would like to say within 24 or 48 hours, but one of our attorneys says he's, a week behind, and so we're trying to shore that up. So I would go ahead and send it, and if you have an urgent time frame to it, if it's not, if the deadline is September 3rd, say it's September 3rd, you need it by. If you need, just let us know the time frame, and we'll try to accommodate you. That's how our attorneys are working it, to make sure that everyone's getting help based on their time constraints. So just make that really clear, and we'll try to accommodate you accordingly. That's a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that, Whitney. Lily in Illinois, how can we help you, Lily?
Yeah, Brad, thank you so much. My daughter goes to, she's a freshman, she's going to Santa Clara University. And the school just recently, they sent out an email mandatory, all the staff and the students taking the COVID vaccine. And they don't take religious exemption. I emailed them, specifically ask about that, and they say, no, they only take medical exemption. So, and my daughter is only 17 years old. She's not going to be 18. The school start. So I'm not sure what can we do, because I know other states. I checked online. Other states, they do have a religious exemption, right, but CA isn't. Yeah. So what can I do? And the dates they asked us to comply is September 1st.
Right. Okay. September 1st. And once again, this is what's the name of the university?
Santa Clara University. It's actually a Catholic background, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's a private university. It's not a public university. I think that's
really, if it's University of Santa Clara, and that might be the case, because we saw something similar with Catholic-run universities on the East Coast, and an interesting development just happened this week on that front, which may be helpful. Which is to say, the bishops in South Dakota issued a statement saying that they believed, and they found that within the Catholic doctrine, there is room for people with it's called your personal conscience. Obviously, you know what that is, but it's a concept within Catholicism. And they said that even though the church, by and large, has come out and said that the vaccine is morally acceptable, even so, people who are Catholic may still nonetheless have a personal conscience objection, and that is valid. And so if you are finding that is the problem, that they're saying, well, the church has taken a position, we can't help you, I would push back on that. And please reach out, because I will personally help you with that.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much, Emily.
Yeah, definitely. Robin in Madera, what's your question, Robin?
Sorry.
I'm just asking about the religious exemptions. When we had a meeting at work, they had talked about when the religious exemptions were brought forth, they would have a panel of people reading over our exemptions to see if they were valid or not. How do they decide what my feelings towards what God is telling me is valid?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'll just tell you right up front, the question is not whether or not what you say is correct, or whether or not it even is theologically sound or even logical necessarily. The question is, are you sincere about that religious belief or conviction? And that's where you want to, when you write it out, you don't want to be mechanical. You want to put your heart into it. If you feel the Holy Spirit has led you and you prayed about this, you feel convicted in your heart, you want to put that in there. You want to, cite, I'd say at least a couple scriptures. And some people, like I say, they have difficulty, expressing themselves. They're just not into writing, but they have the feelings. They should not hesitate to give us a call, and we can sort of ask questions and help you flesh out what your feelings are. We won't tell you what your feelings are because they're your feelings, not ours. But it just needs to be sincere. That's the key. And so don't hesitate to and in fact, the deeper you are, the more you write, the more you say, the stronger, the more compelling the case is that it is sincere. And that's all you have to show. That's the burden. Okay?
Okay. So just one more question, sorry. On that, because when you talk about your body as your temple, I've had a lot of people say, well, you put other things in your body that aren't good for you, or you do other things that aren't, like I've had to get the flu shot in the past for my job.
Oh.
But
right,
I've changed how, well, this is different to me anyways, but also like what was said earlier, my walk has changed too. Like just my relationship with God has also changed throughout my life.
Right.
And right now I just feel completely convicted not to get this. So,
Yeah. I know. Let me just touch on that too. Okay. Sometimes I fight cholesterol. My cholesterol goes up and down. So do I have a bowl of ice cream? Occasionally. That's not going to kill me. I'm not convicted that that bowl of ice cream is going to damage my body if occasionally I have ice cream or do this. That's moderation. This is a vaccine that is going to be binding on my RNA for the rest of my life. Okay? So there's a huge difference. And people, there's people out there who say, well, I don't see anything wrong with the vaccine. Well, that's okay. That's your point. That's your contention. But my beliefs are premised on something else. And my beliefs are to take care of my body. If I perceive something that is going to be materially risking my body and my future health, that plays right along with the fact that my body is God's temple, and I need to take care of it. And there are doctors, specialists that I know that I've talked to, who are very respected in the medical industry, who are more emphatic about it than I am. So there is a clear distinction, and I don't think you have any difficulty making your point as far as the sincerity. But if they come back and tell you, say, well, you're a little overweight, aren't you? Or da-da-da-da-da. That's different. And the key is not how they see it. It's your conviction. And you just, make your case, and you don't have to be too much into the facts and be in a fact debate. It's not about facts. It's about your conviction of what God is calling you to do after prayer and seeking the Lord's direction. Tina in Encino. What's your question, Tina? Tina in Encino? You got to push the mute button. Got to push the mute button or I can't hear you. Okay, Tina in Encino. All right, we're going to move on.
No, I'm here.
Okay, got to push the mute button, folks. Okay, go ahead, Tina.
Okay. I'm having a situation right now at my apartment complex where I just got all the tenants got sent a 7-page letter saying that we all have to sign this document releasing us releasing them of liability to use the pool and pool furniture. And we already have a lease, right, that entitles us to that. So I'm just wondering what my rights are.
Okay, interesting. Of course, you've had a change in events called COVID-19.
We haven't had the pool all year.
Yeah, you haven't had the pool all year. Okay. Emily, what are your thoughts about that?
That's
department?
yeah, that's a contract law question, and I love contract law. Genuinely, I do. So I would look at the terms of your lease and see what it says in the agreement about the use of facilities, etc., and what it says about a change in terms, because presumably you have a year-to-year lease, and so they can't change the terms if you've been paying your rent, which I assume you have. And even if you haven't, it looks like there's probably a moratorium on evictions anyway, but that's a joke. No, look at your terms of your lease and see what you've agreed to and what they have to do to make a change in your agreement and the terms. And secondly, releases, I would look at the release as well and see what it is they're asking you to sign off on, because those typically aren't enforceable. And finally, to be honest, they're typically not. And finally, look at FEHA, which we talk about that in the employment context. That's fair employment. But the second part is and housing. So it might also be discriminatory depending on what it is they're making you release and sign off on. So if you need to reach out to us, please do. But look at your lease and look at what they're making you sign specifically.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Brittany in Thousand Oaks, what's your question?
Hi, I work for the crime lab as an employee with California Department of Justice. I'm a criminalist specializing in DNA, so I routinely wear a mask when I'm analyzing the evidence, but that's not a mask all day long. So I felt like before they were requiring vaccination status, I started going through the mask exemption process, and I was informed by my supervisor that she's really concerned that I might not be able to perform my job duties because of this mask exemption that I was asking, which was basically just to state that I don't want to have to wear a mask all day long. And so I recanted on my mask exemption because I felt like I was being pressured by my supervisor not to do it because I felt like my job was being threatened. And then now, obviously working for the state of California, I feel like they're going to be mandating vaccines here pretty soon. And I 100% disagree with that. I don't want to give my employer any medical information. And so, and I want to do a religious exemption, but I also feel like that's kind of a cop out in the sense that I feel like I'm kind of agreeing with the fact that it's okay with what they're doing and I'm not okay at all with what they're doing. So I don't really know how to proceed.
Yeah, that's interesting. I bet there's a lot of people in your situation, what you just described, or something similar to it. Emily, what should she do? Does she still have a right to make a request an exemption regarding the masks, medical exemption? And as far as religious exemption, I mean, that's really up to her to decide what to do. But if it's a sincere religious exemption, it's still something that a card she could still play, correct?
Right. If you have a sincerely held religious belief that prevents you from getting the vaccine, absolutely, it's your choice whether or not you want to use that as your reason. There may be other reasons that you would rather pursue. Will they be as legally effective? Probably more difficult, to be honest, but doesn't mean you can't do that. The objecting to the mask is more difficult. I have someone I'm representing right now who objects on religious grounds to both the vaccine and to wearing a mask. She does not work in a lab or any type of situation like that. So that is proving more challenging. We have studies that we know of that show that you can have natural immunity if you do. And so there are arguments you can make on that front. The Cleveland Clinic's probably the best known study on that. So there are medical arguments you can make. They're just not as straightforward, put it that way, on the legal front, because there are specific religious protections you have. Doesn't mean that's your only argument or that that's the one you should make.
I just don't feel like I should have to give my employer any information on whether or not I have natural immunity or whether or not I've been vaccinated or not vaccinated. So it's like kind of difficult in the sense of, if I'm going to go the mask exemption route, how much information are they going to ask of me? Because they wanted to draft a letter to ask further information from my doctor, so I feel like that's the way that's going.
Okay. So Emily, if let's say she got a letter from a doctor saying, or a psychiatrist saying, who is also a doctor and MD, saying that that she has been recommended not to wear a mask all day for medical reasons or for health reasons, and that it's a recommendation for her not to do that. Would that be enough, or does she have to show medical charts and past history and have a medical explanation to have any kind of a case for a medical exemption?
You certainly don't need to give them any more than you have to. Now, we see something similar, for example, when a lawyer gets sued by a client, it does happen, and they put your representation at issue, then in some ways they have put your communications at issue, and so your confidentiality may be lifted. So if you put your medical status at issue, in some ways you are going to be forced to share some information. It might just be a letter from your doctor outlining your personal medical situation and why you can't wear a mask for 10 hours a day. So it depends on how much you want to leverage your medical situation. Then you're going to have to be able to substantiate that to some degree. But of course, as you point out, they're going to have to ask your doctor for that information, and you're going to have to consent. You're going to have to consent for your doctor to share that, and that's where you'll see that HIPAA piece come in and actually give you some protection.
Yeah, and I think that's very valuable. And it seems to me that it would be more problematic if you had, say, a letter from a psychiatrist, and for them saying we want information about your background. It just seems that's even more intrusive when it's of a psychological nature. Hypertension, anxiety attacks, whatever the issue may be that these masks can bring on someone. I think a letter from a doctor or a psychiatrist should be sufficient. And because if they go beyond that, then the question is, to what extent are they harassing you and being unreasonable with regards to their mandates and requirements? Are they really needing further additional information? Are they going to try to disagree with a doctor when they don't have a medical degree or a psychiatrist? It is true. From an evidentiary perspective, you have a stronger case, and you, in the back of your mind, need to work through to the extent to which you are going to be willing or not willing to go beyond just, say, a letter from a doctor, giving that information. Also, the doctor doesn't have to be in your state. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, that's a federal law. It's not a state law. That allows you to be accommodated with a doctor's letter from any state. And the frontline doctors, I know, have helped a lot of people. All right. Derek and Lincoln University. Derek, what's your question?
Yes, so I'm a union contractor, and most of our customers are hospitals, healthcare, and places that want you to get vaccinated. So my company is highly recommending that I get the vaccine. But since I work at so many different buildings, how would I go about getting a vaccine? Would I have to-
a religious exemption.
Religious exemption, I'm sorry.
Your employer won't help you.
My employer really didn't offer any help.
Okay, but your employer is not requiring the vaccine, but just the places that you go to do your work who don't employ you, right? Okay, so Emily, what about that situation? There are requirements for a vaccine, but he's not an employee, so Title VII doesn't kick in then?
You're going to, well, to the extent that you're working with I think you said you work for an overarching group that sends you out into different homes. It's no different really than somebody who works on various job sites, right? So you want to tell them they're not going to help you, fine. You want to draft your letter stating your sincerely held religious belief. You're going to point to Title VII, which protects you. And then what you're going to have to do, and this is important for everyone really, is you want to say what the accommodation is that you're asking for. That if you're willing to wear a mask when you're on site, let them know that. If you have the antibodies and you've had a test to show that you have natural immunity, tell them that as well. So basically, what you're going to do to help keep yourself and your employees or your colleagues and the workplace safe, even if you're not vaccinated. So if you need help writing that letter, please reach out to us and we can read it over and add in, what you might need and help on that front. But as long as it's sincerely held, then your employer can still tell them, all of our employees are either vaccinated or have specific federally required accommodations.
Okay, and that's very good, very good. James in Washington State, what's your question, James?
Oh, hi. Thanks for taking my question here. I currently work for the state. I think I may have missed a little bit of the earlier portion of this Zoom call. It sounds like you may have touched on the governor's recent email to the state employees mandating a vaccine shot for state employees. And so I currently live in Spokane Valley, which is the farthest point away from Olympia. However, I'm assuming that this mandate is all about workplace safety, or maybe because there's a large group that meet in these headquarters. I live far away. I work out of my home. I saw this email and I just thought it was ridiculous that all state employees would be required to get this. I do know that at the bottom of the email, he talked about a religious exemption in there or a medical exemption. So I did pastor a church for 5 years in Olympia when I lived in that side of the state. So I certainly do have convictions about that. But I just think it's kind of ridiculous when you think about it. He mentioned that your agencies would provide you with direction or guidance regarding accommodations for people who have this exemption. And I don't know, I just wanted to wonder what your take is on it first and foremost. And, when you talk about accommodations, I mean, for someone who works out of their house on the opposite side of the state, what is a reasonable accommodation in your opinion? And is this even something that's legal when you talk about an EUA?
Yeah, you work out of your house?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm trying to even figure this one out. If you have a religious objection to vaccines, a reasonable accommodation I think would simply be you don't get vaccinated. There's no reason to require you to wear a mask if you're in your house. You're not representing a meeting with clients, right?
Well, everything we do now is over Microsoft Teams. I mean, we've gotten, in the last 18 months, every meeting has been over Microsoft Teams. So I don't, I'm in the food industry, so I don't go out and do inspections. I don't actually interact with anybody other
Right.
than.
Okay. So I think a reasonable accommodation would be just simply for you not to be vaccinated. Any other requirements would be illogical given where your working situation. Emily, any thoughts on that real quickly, or?
If you're working entirely from home and only meeting people online via Microsoft Teams, you're much more likely to get a computer virus than the COVID virus. So,
Yeah, maybe an eye problem here.
Okay.
so it's hard to. There's actually at that point you're probably straining even a rational basis, which is a really low standard. So you reach out to us if you have any difficulty on that.
Okay, gotcha. We're going to try to get some more, just a few in real quickly. So let's try to do these fast. Juan in Virginia. Juan, okay.
I'm sorry. Yes, I just wanted to ask if the HIPAA regulations can be used in order to not acquiesce to a request for vaccination status.
That's a common, we get that question a lot because HIPAA is often referred to as protecting your medical privacy, which it does, but it only applies to HIPAA covered entities, which are typically healthcare providers or your insurance provider. So they cannot share your healthcare information, but if you, an employee, are asked directly, that is you voluntarily answering the question. You can always decline to give that information. And in most contexts, you'll then be treated as though you're unvaccinated, although you haven't told them. And in fact, in the resource that we just updated, there's actually some expanded discussion about that to explain how HIPAA does and does not apply in various contexts. But to push back in the employment context, you'll go to Title VII in most situations for your medical or your religious exemption.
Right. Alicia in Tacoma, Washington. Okay, going once, going twice. All right, Sharon in Tustin, California.
Hi, yes, I'm have a question in regards to my daughter, who is attending San Diego State University, or at least hoping to, and they had for a long time gone according to that they were not going to require anything, any vaccination until FDA approved. They since just last week did a 180 and now are saying that all students have to be vaccinated and upload everything by August 16th. And anyone who fills out any exemption, it'll be reviewed. And if it is accepted, of which they only have a limited number of exceptions that they will take, that those students will be tested each day until into September, or when the university deems that their policy needs to change.
Tested each day with a PCR up the nose?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay, Emily, what's your thought on this?
We're, for time purposes, reach out to us directly. We are and have been and continue to be working directly with the state university people. We've had a lot of success, and just I'll leave it at that. Reach out to us and we'll help you because we have SDUS. We have
So how do I, because I have contacted and sent in my religious exemption, well, my daughter's religious exemption
Yeah.
form to be reviewed. And I also have screenshots of everything because of the San Diego State University, because most of this information is through their password protected, only the students can access it. So they have the form that you fill out, which is their actual statements that you have to initial an agreement. And my concern is, what are we setting them up for?
Okay. Provide that to us, contact our office, and we'll work with you on that. That's for sake of time. There's much more involved in that. I would love to take a look at it though. We're going to bat for a lot of students right now. And I can't get in more details, but we'd love to help you. Francisca in San Diego. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Contact our office immediately. And let them know about the time constraints. I appreciate that. Francisca in San Diego.
Hi.
Last question. Go ahead.
Yes, hi, thank you. My question is regarding non-English speaking parents with school-age children. We live within San Diego Unified School District, and they're very adamant about masks and most likely vaccines. And I know a lot of parents, a lot of immigrant parents, refugee parents, have deeply held religious convictions, and they might, because of the language barrier, they might not know about the exemptions. I don't know what you would suggest. Thank you.
Yeah, good point. In other words, there's a need to connect with those people who do not speak English, who have religious convictions. I will tell you, we at Pacific Justice right now, I just talked with our staff about this, to expand our coverage of our Legal Edge commentaries onto Christian Spanish-speaking radio stations. We've had it for a long time, and then we need to reboot that. And I think that would help to some degree. But any individual needs assistance like that, we have our website is in Spanish, so they can click Spanish and they can look at many of our resources. And they can also contact our office, and we'll be happy to have someone who speaks Spanish to talk to them and help them. But you're absolutely right. That's a real crisis, and it's a real issue. There are many people with different languages, particularly on the West Coast, that have sincerely held religious beliefs who do not speak English, or at least speak it fluently enough to really be able to communicate. So with someone who speaks English, I appreciate that very much. You guys have been great. I'm sorry, I apologize for those who weren't able to get in initially. We hit our cap at 1,000. Like I say, the response at the last minute was much faster than it's ever been. So I don't know if someone suddenly just sent out the invitation, to all their buddies out there. And but whatever the case is, we tried to help as many of you as we can. We have hundreds and hundreds right now we're representing. Do not hesitate to contact us. Be patient. Let us know your time constraints so we can help you. And I once again want to thank you so much for those of you out there who support our work and make this possible. The stakes are high. Our freedoms are important. And we at PJI never, ever forget it. And I know the same goes for you, particularly those who pray for our work as well as partner in our legal ministry. So folks, remember, no matter what we're facing, always remember to keep the faith. God bless.